Hi, everyone. Welcome again to MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. In these fireside chats, we speak with the people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes. My guest today is Monique Jackson. Again, Monique is a senior people strategist with over a decade of experience leading inclusive cross-functional programs at scale. As a senior director of people at Gusto, she oversees DEI, benefits, and engagement strategy for 3,000 plus employees, aligning culture with business impact. Her work includes launching Gusto's Total Reward Survey, community building framework, and the Affinity Group Summit to improve retention and engagement. Previously, she led global ERG strategy and workplace experience at WeWork, supporting culture transformation across the tri-state region. Monique holds an MBA from the University of Florida and a BS in accounting from Rutgers and multiple certifications in DEI and intercultural development. We've spoken once before. This is round two. Welcome to Behind the Build, Monique. Really glad to have you here again.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be back. Our conversation was amazing, but there's so much more to be said and to discuss. So definitely looking forward to this round two.
Yeah, so much to talk about. And we left off talking a lot about you and your story, your path, your journey, a lot about what you do at Gusto. And I'm really interested to kind of dive into, leadership. I kind of want to take a turn into some of the challenges you see, maybe not necessarily at Gusto, but in your past roles or from the business world at large, and what you see from the organizations that work with Gusto. So how frequently do challenges related to community, culture, inclusivity, and equity create, roadblocks for certain initiatives or overall organizational goals, and how does this sort of friction manifest itself for these businesses?
Yeah, I think there's so many directions I can go with answering this question. I think that there's so many buzzwords out there. There's so many phrases about the importance of community and culture for not only being able to lead a team, but also having that connected back to a business being successful. Where I see it getting people stuck most times is separating culture, community, the experience that they're building from the business. They treat them like they're these two separate entities, that in order to drive great results, you can't quote unquote have fun.
Yeah.
And if you have fun, you're not driving results versus really thinking about what is the end goal and that connection point. I know we talked a little bit about before, but an example that I would definitely say is, working at WeWork, one of the great things is you're building for someone else, right? We're building for small businesses, no matter the size, to kind of come in. But if we don't have a good culture and sense of community on our team, we're really just building a building, right? What makes us different? And I think that was right, like from a product perspective, that was a differentiator during my time at WeWork when we think about other places that people were just going into work. You're building an experience, but that experience has to be organic. It can't be built in a box almost. It has to be a thoughtful part of how you're driving, which then turns into sales. It turns into retention. It turns into great experience. So I think that one of the biggest things that I see is people separating those things, thinking that they cannot interact. I think the other thing, and my team, we sit in the HR space. Previously, most of my roles, right, like I sat on the business side. I sat really in the revenue generating side, and what I heard often come up is that the people problems are the HR problems. So people issues have nothing to do with my job as a leader. And again, there's a separation, but the separation happens in a different place, right? It's
Yeah.
allowing that lack of connection and thinking about the people to not be your problem. And to be a great leader, no matter how big or small your team or organization is, people need to be at the center of that. They are the driver of your vision. Even if you're a solopreneur, the contractor you hire once or the person that buys your product, they're actually part of, that culture and community that you are building. So I think that those are the two ways I've seen it. Both really do boil down to people seeing these things as separate. But that's kind of where my mind went, like kind of starting the conversation.
That's so I think that it's a really sort of astute observation, and I think it does happen. Do you think that this is a major blind spot for leaders? You feel that like small business leaders are tapped into the need for things like community and inclusivity, or tapped in enough?
So I had an interesting conversation yesterday with a founder, and what we kind of got to the root of, I think for a lot of small business owners, their sense of community is built in what community they need, not the sense of community that they may be building internally, right? And both need to exist, but they both serve different purposes, right? When you build your community as a small business owner, you're building almost a council of sorts, right? And that community could be built up of family, friends, investors, board members, consultants. And you need that, right? You need those. But when you think about the internal community that you're building, those are going to be the people that are going to be up all night making sure that the product works.
Yeah.
Those are going to be the people that are answering the calls when someone's not happy about it, right? And again, whether that's a contractor or a full-time employee, either way, they need to think about how they fit into the community that you're building. And I know we talked about this a little bit in our first conversation, especially for small business owners. You are the first sense of community and culture for your company. You are what you build. And there's a challenge as you're building a community that's additive versus fitting. And I think that that's where for small businesses, it does become hard, because if you think about it, if you're building something, you are going to invite people that you trust. You're going to invite people that you know, which usually they're going to be very similar to you in some way, shape, or form, whether that's lived experience, background from a job. So you're not adding into the community. So I think, again, that's why understanding why both communities need to exist for small business owners, the community you're building for yourself as a support, and then the community you're building internally, they actually do commingle, because a lot of times you're going to meet someone at an event that you may be going to that's part of that external community that's going to connect you to someone that's not part of your network. So it's going to challenge you to say, how can I bring this person to the internal community that I'm building, the culture that I'm building, and the direction I want to actually grow and thrive? So I think that for small business owners, they see it, they understand it, and I get it. You have to be selfish, I think, a little bit when you're starting a small business, right? It's your capital, it's your
Right.
sweat equity that's going into it. But most people don't start a business to stop it. So you want to grow
I
it.
like that. I see that turning into a meme. But 100%. And as I'm hearing this, it makes me think that this likely extends to the hiring choices that leaders make, right? So it makes me curious, like where, you've brought up, right, when people are bringing others onto their team, right? Oftentimes it's people they know, or people that are already in their community, right? Do you see that as one of the major missteps when people are building their team? Well, tell me some of the ramifications, right,
Yeah.
of these things for their business and the people.
Yeah. So I'll share something maybe more anecdotal and then kind of broaden out. So whenever I'm on an interview panel, and this is throughout my career, what I always ask the hiring manager is, what are you missing? What is your team missing? What gap are you trying to fill? And usually people don't think about that when they're hiring, right? You
Mhm.
may think about, hey, I need an accountant,
Right.
right? So I need to hire someone that has an accounting skills. Yes, but what else is your team missing? What are you not good at? Because those are going to be the areas in which I look for that person to spike. So I know that they're adding something to the team. So maybe you're not good at putting together decks, and for whatever reason, this accountant candidate spikes there. That's something additive that they're bringing into the team, where you have been able to identify a weakness and you're able to, right, like rectify that. So what are the ramifications of, I would say, hiring a more homogenous team, or not going outside of maybe your network, um, your product, your service is going to then be designed for a very specific group of people. You are actually limiting your consumer base, your customer base, by limiting the experiences in which you invite to the conversation for building it. So, oh, go ahead.
That no, I am right there with you, and I think that that's actually really really big. You know, the more diversity that you can add to your internal conversations, you're going to wind up reaching more people outside of your organization.
Yeah.
You know, the more insular the conversations become inside, you start to forget what the rest of the world finds important. You're only worried about what those people in your small, little, tight knit, homogenous group thinks are important. And that may or may not, you know, be valuable to the world at large.
Right. And I think, right, I'm comfortable being challenged of saying, hey, I want to only build for one group. Fine. Cool. If that's the business model, I'm not going to disagree with maybe having some of that more similar experience, but I would challenge you to think about outside of just your consumer, how you're going to build it. Because I think let's see, many moons ago, I had started a small business with two other women, and it was focused on financial literacy for women. Now, we all
Right.
happen to be women of color. We all happen to be Black women. But guess what? It wasn't only women of color and Black women that were coming. So,
Right.
where we had to challenge ourselves is, yes, we knew that that was our main group that we really wanted to support, but we knew that other people were going to come. So, how did we, right? Like, we had to challenge ourselves of who we brought into the conversation as we're thinking about building materials, or if we wanted to grow from an investor perspective, right? And if we think about current day of what investors' portfolios look like, how funding is distributed, you do have to have a little bit more breadth and width to who the audience is. And a lot of times, who you're designing for is not who's going to be using it. There's so many products I can think of that were designed for a particular group of people that another group of people literally picked up and ran with. And if you weren't, right, like, you may not have been able to keep up with that. You may not even have been able to think about that. So I think that that's one of those places where maybe it works. Maybe you're building for a particular group in the beginning, and maybe that's what you're looking for, right? Like, you're looking for this to be something that is very community specific. And I encourage that, right? I think that from an identity perspective, it's very important for us to see different things that are reflective of that. But there's also an invitation for people to experience that, to see that, to want to be involved. And you could unintentionally limit yourself because in the room, everyone's thinking the same. And again, right, like, from an identity or an experience perspective, that could even just be, you're sitting around and everyone that's in the room went to an Ivy League school. That ain't the same.
Yeah.
Right? Like, their experience, how they grew up, even if you say, well, this person was on scholarship, right? Like, let's be real, right? Like, that experience, the opportunities that are available, the rooms that folks are invited to, they're different. So I think that it really bars the question. And it goes back to what I always ask when I'm on a hiring panel. What's missing? What's your blind spot? What did you wish that you would be better at? And I think for small businesses, there comes that point where, again, where, like, you're selfish, and I encourage that, but you're gonna have to let some things go. You're gonna have to figure out where's the place you really want to zone in so that other people can help you grow and thrive. And I think that there's definitely that balance, as a small business owner, depending on what stage you're at,
Mhm.
and who you're truly building for and why you're building, as well.
It's I think it's one of those growth planes, I think, for leadership, is uh being able to first, you know, be aware that your room might need to look a little bit different to invite, you know, different perspectives into the conversation, and then being okay with that feedback that you're going to get that might not be consistent with how you see the world. Because, you know, there's a lot of lenses that the world gets seen through. um you know.
It's hard. And I think that that's the part, right? Because it's often easy to tell people, right? And I've worked in the DEI space, inclusion space, whatever we want to call it, right? Like, the trying to make the world a better place, right? Like, space, for a long time. And oftentimes, I try to be cautious with this as well. It's always like, get more people in the room, get different perspectives in the room. But if the room is not going to be a room where people are going to be able to speak up or their feedback is going to be thrown out, maybe you're also not ready for that too. And I think that that also is a sign of, right, like leadership and growth mindset. If you are a leader and that's what you are going to be driving for, and you know it's something that's important, how do you also set that example?
Yeah.
So I think that small businesses have that, they have a little bit more grace and latitude in being able to do that versus like bigger companies,
Mm-hmm.
because you've built so many muscles in a certain way of operating. It becomes more difficult to break down and really create that space where voices are heard, it's included, feedback is received well, and you can actually do something with it.
I mean, we actually didn't even intend on even talking about this, but we actually just internally created a very recently
Mm-hmm.
a Slack channel called Bad Ideas or Terrible Ideas, and the idea was, and the first thing I posted in there was, the companies that are going to be successful are the ones where even all of the bad ideas are safe. So leading with curiosity, you know, is a valuable and important way to kind of go about doing business. So let's throw things out there. Some of them might be valuable, but some of them might not. And if they're not, then that's okay too. So
And no, I love that. And I think there's two things that I really love about that. One, how long did it take to, you think it took someone to create the Slack channel?
it takes 2 seconds.
Right? It's not that hard, right? So I think that sometimes when we're thinking about changing or shifting behaviors or instituting a new culture, a lot of times things don't have to be that hard. You're
No.
right. Curiosity is very key. If you kill curiosity at some point in your journey, you're actually killing the ability to grow, change, right? You're suffocating voices almost in a way. And I think if you learn that the only way to make sure that behavior, that culture is kind of continued, is to create a space where it's okay, then that's what you can do, right? It could even be, right, like I think there's so many ways to tackle that. But if you, sometimes you just have to create the space for it. You have to make it a part of the behaviors. And I guess maybe there's something in the air. Earlier this week, last week, we had a leadership on site, and we were talking about that, like not just bad ideas, but failing, right? Like perfection, right? Like it drives the inability to be curious. It drives the inability for safe bad ideas. So I think that, one, being able to identify what's not happening and then coming up with a quick solution that may be temporary. It may not be, you're right, like that channel may only need to exist for a period of time until it just becomes okay in all spaces to do it. Or it just becomes a thing that, hey, it's part of our traditions or our cultural tenets that we want to keep around because it's a reminder of where we've come. So I love that, one, that there was an identification of where there was a miss, and then a simple solution, a simple fix, to just start creating that. And even the people that aren't participating in the channel, I can always guarantee there's always eyes watching in the Slack channels. Even if people are not emojining or engaging,
It's
you'd be
true.
very surprised. So don't underestimate, or that may be, and I know we talked about this in our first time together, the data trap, right? Like that's not a full indicator of, right, like who might be watching and how that may show up or speak to someone else.
You made a comment about perfection, and it's funny, like it's one of the reasons that we created this channel, because oftentimes people feel that this idea has to be well baked, right? Or there has to be some strategy around it before you can bring it to somebody else. And sometimes the greatest ideas or plans just start with a small, little curious thought, right? And perfection is a moving target, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I teach my kids all the time. Perfection is a moving target. Don't try to be perfect. Just try to be 1% better, And if that, you know, compound interest, right, is the eighth wonder of the world there. If you can be 1% better every day or every week, by the time that you're an adult, look at as much as you've grown. So
Yeah, and this kind of even goes back to when we talked about building teams. One, I always say when the room is quiet, if I am like, hey, are there any questions, thoughts? I'm like, if you have it, someone else in the room has it, but someone needs to say it. But then the other piece of it is when you come up with an idea, it may just be the seed of the idea.
Right.
And you need the people in the room to make it grow and water it and nurture it. But if you never even put the seed on the table, and I think, I work through this with my therapist all the time, and perfection and all of the things that give us high senses of anxiety in today's world. That 1% model is like, be 1% better than yourself day after day, right? That's who you need to be better than.
Yeah.
That is it. And
That's
I
your
think
only competition, if
that
you
that
even want to call it that.
exactly. And I think that what was I must have been a show, and this really makes me think about small businesses, and they were talking to someone, and they were coming up with ideas, and every time they would come up with that idea, they'd say, yeah, but somebody's already doing that. And they're like, oh, but somebody, and the person responded, it's not about how many people are doing it, it's who's doing it the best. So again, that 1% better mindset, there's so many. I always think about coffee, and I'm always like, Dunkin' Donuts does not have a competitor. Who else? Like that to me is right. Like, you have the Wawa coffees now making its thing, and then the 7, but and I'm like, but it's coffee. They have been able to just have America run on Dunkin' in the most interesting way. Like, you can say, oh well, Starbucks, but it's like, yeah, but it's not the same. So I always think about it, it's like, find your thing. And then you could be a coffee shop, right? Because you 1% better than every other coffee shop in your city. But I just think about it in that way of like, we could be so right, like they call it limiting beliefs. We have so many of them in our minds about what we can or cannot do or what's possible, that we become our own worst enemy. So if we flip into an abundance mindset,
Yeah.
right, versus a scarcity mindset, and lean into that 1% every day, I think in so many ways the world could be better if that's where we put most of our energy, than other places.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. You have me now missing my days when I lived on the East Coast and was introduced to Dunkin' Donuts on every other street corner. We know where you're from.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
but so it leads me to a little bit of a question.
Sure.
Not really a pivot here, but I want to lean into this idea of managing distributed teams, right? Because I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that plays a role in a lot of people problems. Um, that we see in business. It's a major challenge for a lot of folks. What can business leaders do in that area to build the connection and the community? So we've talked a lot about getting people into the conversation, getting people in the same room, and I know that's sort of a euphemism,
Mm-hmm.
but the reality is that room is more difficult to manage when everybody is very distributed.
Yeah, no, I love this question. And I'm gonna start with something that a lot of leaders will not like to hear. But if your distributed teams are failing and they're not connected and they're not performing, that's on the leader, not on them. And I stand by that. I lead a completely distributed team currently. I have now a team of 6. Only 2 of them are in the same city.
Wow.
Everyone I have remote, I have near offices. None of us are near each other. So, but I feel like I literally talk to everyone on my team every day. I see them multiple times a week on Zoom. We feel very connected, but it's intentional. So I think what is important when we talk about this room, right? One thing that's important is around setting some expectations in regards to how you communicate with your team, so it seems as though you're next to one another. So what does that look like? What are some examples of that? Everyone shares their priorities for the week on Monday, what's going on, and as a leader, maybe you'll share where you're going to be, whether that's a training you're going to,
Mhm.
whether that's some company-wide things that you'd love to see presence from everyone on. But this one sets the tone of folks not feeling like they can't stop by and see what you're doing. And two, it also creates some type of ability for collaboration. So within my team, I pretty much have 3 different buckets of work, but we work very cohesively. But sometimes I may miss, or they may forget to say in a one-to-one with each other what they're working on, and miss an opportunity for us to be more intentional about how we're working together. Setting the tone in the beginning of the week allows that. Um, One-to-ones. I have one-to-ones with everyone on my team every single week for a reason. It is solely for the purpose of them to feel connected. It is their time. It is not mine. My expectation is you come in with your one-to-one agenda filled out. We have some things that are recurring that we always talk about. Quarterly, we always talk about development. And at the beginning of my one-to-ones, something that I took from a previous leader was feedback 5. So the first 5 minutes of the one-to-one is dedicated to feedback. Good, bad, what would you like me to do differently? How can I support you? Are there any blockers? And that again is to set some behaviors of, even if you don't see me all the time, you can
Come and tell me.
always provide me
Yeah.
feedback. You can always tell me what's going on. I am a Slack junkie. So I am the random on a Wednesday, throw me the Giphy that's making you feel, telling me how you feel today, right? Like, our Slack channel is for business, but it's also for connection. So I definitely leverage that as a platform. We also have team meetings. When we first got together, because we're distributed and we have a lot of different disciplines, they were longer and more frequent. As the team has grown, I've shifted a little bit the cadence of them happening, but as a team collectively, we come together at least once a month. And the purpose of that is to share updates, but also just to connect, just to
Yeah.
talk. One team meeting, we watched the How to Train a Dragon um, live action preview because we were talking about it so much in our team meeting. I was like, let's just watch it. Right. So I think that there's that intentionality. Now let's talk about getting together. The buzzword, and I actually lean into it, and I've used it for years, but creating moments that matter. When do you need to get them together? What is important? What timing of the year makes sense? So I can use an example. Part of my umbrella is in benefits. We know that we have open enrollment, we have planning that's tied to it. So I ensure that I build into our planning model actual time for us to be face to face, us to actually get together and work together. Because whether we like it or not, there is added value of being together in person and being collaborative, but it has to make sense and it has to have a purpose. I am not the type of person that's like, oh, yeah, there's nothing going on, so let's all get together and hang out. No, I think that moments that matter needs to be a combination of learning, development, operational work, moving things forward, and community.
Yeah.
And when all of those things are together, it actually continues to bring the team. Now, again, I'll go back to my first phrase of why I say that distributed teams that are not successful are on the leader is because all of those things are because I have to do them. I'm not looking for anyone on my team to make these things happen. I'm not expecting them to create that culture because then what happens when they need support, when they need something, they can Slack me. We can jump on a huddle. We can hop on a Zoom. That um, barrier to experience that is created because we're not next to one another doesn't exist. It's no different than them just tapping me on my shoulder to sending me a Slack and saying, can you jump on a huddle? Right. So I think that to me, it's really important to set the tone for your team from the beginning in the interview process, all of those things, and then continue those behaviors within the experience of your team. But again, you as a leader set the tone of that, you set the expectation, and you model the behavior, and the engagement scores, the productivity scores of in office versus remote. I think that that's one of those places of where parity, you have more control to achieve it than you may realize.
I love what you're talking about. What question that sort of comes to mind is
Mhm.
if leaders feel like or can sense that they're not getting it right,
Mhm.
or there are issues, where do they even start if they want to turn it around? Like, how do they become aware of it, that what they're doing is wrong? How do they begin to remedy these things? What are the steps?
Yeah, no, really good question. I'll give a couple different, I'll say, doorways for entry because of what you may have access to. So I'll start with, like, if you have access to data around engagement and you're able to see your engagement data for your team through the lens of location or remote versus in office. Start there. Is there something going on? Is there something that's different, right? That's how you can identify that potentially you have some work to do. If you don't have access to that, most leaders, I will give them credit, are pretty smart. So normally they know when something's not going well, right? They know if they have a bunch of team members on pips that are not in an office versus in an office, right? Like they're pretty intuitive. They can use their kind of discretion of what's going on. So then how do you start navigating that? One, ask your team.
Yeah.
Come up with some very specific questions, right? Like, and I know we're going to probably talk a little bit about tools, but guess what? There's a handy little friend that could help you get some great questions called ChatGPT, right? Mine is called Lumi. I named him and we interact daily. But come up with some very specific questions, like 2 questions, not something wild, not something crazy, not something overwhelming, to ask everyone on your team the next one-on-one. And tell them, I've noticed XYZ and I want to start making some changes. I would love your perspective. Or what's one thing I can do to make you feel more connected to the team and the larger work? And guess what? Most times when you ask, people will tell you, especially if you are approaching it through the lens of, I've noticed XYZ. I want to do something better. There's a level of accountability there that your team is going to recognize, even a level of vulnerability of showing a weakness, if you want to put it that way, of where you want to be better as a leader. They will give you some ideas.
Yeah.
Try different things. Also, I think that this is where, and we talked a little bit about community, and we definitely talked about it through that small business lens. And this applies there, but I think if you're a leader anywhere, you should always have some type of accountability partner, and also some leaders that you kind of look up to and or admire or see doing things right. Ask in your next leadership meeting, hey, I've noticed this. Has anyone found anything that's worked? If you have a Slack channel, hey, I'm really trying to improve engagement this way. Has anyone tried anything that's really been successful for them? Right? I think that step one, if you have a way of identifying the problem through data or access to information, leverage that. If not, you probably know what is going on, or it's not up to the standard in which you would like, right? If you see discrepancies of performance and things of that nature. Next, ask the question. That can be some peer sourcing. That can also be from your team. Start small. No one's saying now start getting your team together every other week in person, right? Like, who has the budget for that? If you have the budget for that and you can send some to me, you can find me on LinkedIn and I will take any donations to get my team to get together more often, right? But start small.
Yeah.
Right? That to me is like the order of operations, I would say.
I like that you brought up data. I know that you talked a little bit about, right, you referenced, some location data and some engagement data, by team or whatnot. Give me some ideas of other people related metrics that leaders should be watching. Are there pieces of data outside of, engagement by location that could be helpful for leaders when it comes to supporting their people to building a strong culture? And do you actually think that business leaders and small businesses are actually monitoring these?
Okay, well, I'll go through it first and then we'll go to the other side. So I'll go through it. I think the easiest way for me to maybe tackle that question is through the employee lifecycle. So the first one is attract, which is basically hiring, right? So there, most of that data is going to be really tied to like your recruiting team. You may have some candidate experience data, but that again is through the interview process. What you could glean maybe from there would be more so tied to if your interview process is too long, if people still don't know what the job is after they start. So there could be some there, but less there. Let's get into once they join the company. The first would be any data that you're collecting in regards to their onboarding experience and any touch points that you may have within their first year of hire. So that could be everything from, did they learn the essential skills of their role? Were they given an onboarding buddy? Do they feel prepared to do their role? So those would be some touch points in the beginning of their career. If we then I'll go to progression before I go to engagement. So progression is really performance related metrics. So there you can look at how your team is performing, right? When we think about, let's say, distribution of performance, right? What does it look like in regards to how folks are showing up? If you have a rating system, do you notice any discrepancies in between folks in different locations, or based on tenure, based on what their onboarding experience is, which you may have some of that qualitative data that you can layer over your performance data. Another thing tied to performance would be feedback. Is your team getting feedback? If you may have a mechanism for collecting feedback for your employees, or you may not. So if you don't necessarily have a platform, let's say, where it's all, put in one particular area, do you have a method in which you receive feedback? Slack, email. Do some team members get more feedback than others? Is it constructive feedback, or is it the nice, fluffy, I love working with this person type of feedback? Is it feedback that's actionable,
Right.
timely, measurable? So in progression, that's some of what I would definitely look at. And if you're in a sales related org, right, or role, or something that has like an OTE or a metric space, you can also look at performance there, where that's a little bit easier to track because it's usually very black and white on what the performance metrics are. Then we look at engagement. This one, right? If you're collecting data, you may have an engagement survey, right? And that can track everything from an NPS, which is really measuring the likelihood of this person to recommend the company as a great place, or just general sentiment and engagement. There's a lot of great research out there. If you're looking to maybe start a way of measuring engagement, there are a list of questions that are really tied to intent to stay, right? So that's really like the retention of employee. It's usually no more than 10 questions, so it could be something small. You don't have to have this elongated survey to track some of this data. You can come up with those ones that not only going to give you some engagement metrics, but also some of that intention to stay. And then when we think about attrition, people will often talk about exit interviews. There's been a lot of rumblings, I would say, in and out for the past couple of years about stay interviews. And the reason I lean more towards the stay interviews, or that pulse while someone is there, is because once they're gone, what's the point of asking them? You didn't want to do anything when they were there. So make sure that whatever you're tracking on that side of the house is really going to be something that you can action. I think that I gave a couple different examples across the employee lifecycle. There's so many more, but I don't want to overwhelm. And I think that what's most important, and shout out to the People Insights team I work with currently, we always jam on not asking any question we can't do anything with. It's rude.
It's yeah.
If you're asking people
Yeah.
and you're not going to do anything, that's rude. Right? Like,
Yeah.
unless you're very clear on like I talked about the total reward survey earlier, and it was very much clear. This is to gather sentiments about how you are thinking. It will not be used to impact us. If you're not going to use it, just be honest, right?
Yeah.
I think that, data for data's sake is very annoying. It's, this is why people get survey burnouts and all of that jazz. And they're not honest. They don't want to talk about it. So I think that if you already are collecting data, make sure that it's data that makes sense. You're asking the right questions, it's timely, and you can actually action on it. If you haven't, make sure you're getting that right group in the room to figure out what you should be asking, when you should be asking, and what you can actually do about it. And then, of course, there's other ad hoc things, such as doing focus groups when you see a hotspot particularly, and you want to get some more conversational data to include that's more qualitative. So that's just like a lot of different examples. Now, your second question was, do we think small businesses are doing it? I would say for the most part, probably no, but I understand probably why. I think that we talked a little bit about where do you need to kind of flip that switch of having someone focused on maybe engagement or culture or community. And we talked about what that employee base number is. And I think before that, there are some more organic ways or very simple ways in which you can gather that data. Again, not to overwhelm yourself.
Yeah.
If you know that you're a new company and you have a small employee base, doing some type of pulse survey every 6 months can be a light lift, and you can do something with it. And it can be very easy, right? Another population of that you can always think about pulsing is like that first 30 days of a new hire, right? Now, survey is one way, but another way is, if your company is small, let's say that you are under 500 employees. We'll just go with 500, right? Because that, again, my brain is tied to like how we look at small and medium businesses. You could even build into your culture that after a certain amount of time someone joins the company, they report back out what they've observed. You come up with some type of template to show that. You build into your team meetings some type of feedback portion. So, hey, every team across the company, once a month, the expectation is that all leaders will gather feedback on key initiatives that we've recently rolled out. Leaders are then to aggregate that, throw it in ChatGPT or whatever, LLM is your preferred tool, summarize it to roll it up to leadership for leadership to see overall, we just rolled out XYZ and this is what the overall said. Right. So there are some ways that you can do that where it can be an intentional lift where you can action on it. I would hate for people to be like, oh, I need to roll out an engagement survey tomorrow, right? It may not be the right time. Again,
Yeah.
what do you
Yeah.
need to know about? What's important to the business right now? And then let's figure it out from there. Again, you have to make that connection all in all, because even with all the data and all the touch points I talked about from a survey perspective, the reason that all of those touch points are important is because when we think about the cost of replacing someone, it's 1.5 to 2 times their salary, right?
Yep.
So there's always a cost associated. There's a cost of productivity. There's cost associated with not paying attention to that. I forgot what I was reading, and then we'll continue the conversation. When it was about someone posted on LinkedIn about an experience he was a CFO and he had hired a new CHRO, and he was asking her questions about the numbers and she knew nothing, and he was livid. He took it upon himself to invite her and her VP into the room I think it was like they did like monthly meetings. He said after about the 6th meeting, she started talking through the lens of data. Oh, well, if we do this training, it costs this many hours of pay, but it actually will increase sales by the. If you're in the space of collecting the data and making, being able to do something with it, you have to be able to tie it back to the business. It is a game changer, I think, for success in your role, but then also to continue to be like a leader at the table, no matter the size of your organization. I think that the balance of those skill sets, again, it's not an either or, it's an and approach when we think about the business and we think about building community or culture or DEI, inclusion, whatever word you may want to use, but that people experience and driving business results.
I think that's good advice. And I think that there's probably a lot of business leaders who do, take pulse surveys or do gather data for data's sake and probably don't necessarily do anything, with it. Or it's not meaningful, right? Or it's not the data that's actually driving some of the issues, problems, or initiatives, right, that they actually want to move towards. But as we kind of wrap up here, I want to take another shift. I want to know more about maybe what you've seen in your experience about human nature, human behavior. What's like a people related insight or cultural competency that maybe tomorrow's business leaders are going to have to develop in order to thrive? That's maybe different from today or yesterday.
Oh, that's a
A lot of new
really
technologies out there.
yeah,
AI is
no.
changing the game.
No, so I'm gonna okay. My brain, there's so many things, oh my goodness, in my brain going on right now. But I think the first thing that came to my mind, I will say, and then I'm gonna also connect it to like where we are from a technology perspective. That's gonna be important. Everybody has a why. I think that we often forget that. Yeah, I mean, say it all the time in every room, so this would not be a surprise to anyone that works with me. I have bills and I love Disney. That is why I work. But I also like helping people and I like making impact. As long as I'm continuously tied to making impact, I'm going to show up. I'm going to give 100%, 200%. People have a why. And I think
Yeah.
it's really important. And even if it is to pay bills, then you know that anything that's going to be tied to financial things, they're going to always work harder if they see an incentive on the other side. But I think that when we think about technology right now, the constant conversation is the number of jobs that are going to be lost. I think that people are going to have to understand, especially as leader, people are afraid, whether it's a real fear, perceived fear, there is a fear. And when people operate in fear in life, the way in which they react is not always great, right? So I think that there's going to be a level of emotional intelligence of leading people through this next technological wave of how this is a superpower and how they are able to leverage it within what they currently do. And I think that there's going to be a need for leaders, whether you are a champion or not of this technological wave, to figure out how you empower yourself and your team to use it, be good at it. And if it's not working, have those honest conversations as well. So I think for me, that's what's top of mind. I think that with the stage that we are in with technology right now, the constant conversations about like that human touch, but there's also a human touch on being able to help people move along with it. It's not just making sure that there's a human element, or a human that's validating whatever AI or whatever LLM or whatever it is that you may be leveraging at this time. But I think that for leaders, if you're not good at change management, if you're not good at driving change, you need to sharpen those skills, because that is very much tied to a people skill set and an emotional intelligence skill set. And you are often the face of changes that you have nothing to do with and you do not agree with.
Yeah.
Helping your team usher through that is not the time for them to know that. You have to figure out how you are going to be able to lead your team through this next wave in a way that drives business results and is people centric. And again, that goes back to understanding your team's why and being able to help them connect those dots. And like I always say, there is it being able to usher people into whatever the next thing is. And then there's also a way to help people self-select. There's the other side.
Yeah.
But you are responsible for making sure that they have the information. People can do a lot with the information that they have. They can't do anything with the information they don't have. So that to me is I would say just a skill set that's kind of existed, but is going to be extremely important, that change management and understanding your team. Otherwise, you might even get left behind because your team can't keep up. You know what I mean? So.
I think that that's incredibly insightful, and a really, really great point to sort of wrap up here. And I don't think that I could possibly agree more. With as fast as things are changing, that need to be able to tap into all those human centric behaviors to navigate all of that stuff is going to be critical. And Bills and Disney, Gusto, if you're listening, Bills and Disney. But Monique, thank you for today. Thanks for coming back for round 2. This was great. A lot learned. So definitely taking notes, and really glad to have you here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me back again. I always say that I hope at least, everyone that, listens into any place I'm speaking, they could take one thing, right? Like, even if it's I ain't going to do what she said. That's something. I'll take it. You took something. I will take it.
Too much here to leave behind, but thank you for tuning into MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. Please like and share this episode. Subscribe while you're at it. Be sure to visit mustardhub.com to learn how we help companies become destinations for workplace happiness and turn culture into a competitive edge. Until next time.